Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Hi guys, welcome to Holy Spirit. It's a new podcast where we dive into the gospel with a little help from our beverages of choice.
Jesus met people where they were, at tables, over meals, with stories that made the sacred feel ordinary and the ordinary feel sacred. Holy Spirits follows that same tradition, creating space for honest, authentic conversations about faith, just as he did.
Holy Spirits can be found on all Studio Wesley Annex channels. Remember, drink responsibly, avoid excessive alcohol use, and always follow John Wesley's first general rule: do no harm.
Hi guys, thank you so much for watching. This is Holy Spirits. It's an audiovisual podcast where we talk about some Lenten scriptures over drinks. I am drinking some wine, and my friend here is drinking a Coke.
What we called in the Hotho household full calorie Coke.
Oh,
Because it wasn't diet.
That's so funny.
Yeah.
I love that. You're kind of turning the table of like what is normal Coke. You're like, no,
Right.
This is the abnormal one. Diet Coke is the regular.
Yeah, Diet Coke is basically the baseline.
I like that.
And then,
So my name is Vendela, and this is...
Hi, I'm Mat Hotho.
And we met a long time ago. Very long time.
I feel like we officially met as adults 2 years ago at Vacation Bible School, about a year and a half.
Yeah. And I was teching because I wanted to do something for the kids, but I didn't want to talk to the kids.
Right.
I think I told you that too.
Yeah,
I felt kind of bad.
Can I hide up here?
Yeah.
And I was like, yeah, totally. Yeah.
I was like, would love to be involved in this wondrous moment of happiness, but I don't want to be seen or heard.
Yeah.
So it was great. It was a
great.
great thing.
I think you were the photographer.
I
right?
was the photographer.
Yeah.
And wasn't I hanging out with, was it your stepson?
Yeah,
Evan. We got close. He
was definitely like, no, she's cool.
Yeah, I mean, he was cool.
Way cooler than me.
I don't know. I thought he was cooler than me. So,
okay.
Yeah. But yeah, we met then, and then we had a conversation because I had not been to the church in like a few years, actually, before that, just because A, I was traveling, but B, I just kind of had distanced myself for a couple different reasons that we can or cannot go into. But honestly, I just, I think it's hard when you go to college and you learn about a lot of like really sad things, and then you're like, oh, this amazing thing when I was a kid like didn't tell me that stuff. But I think that like I've gained so much from this internship that you told me about. And also I think I didn't realize that a lot of the spaces that the United Methodist Church has to offer are actually not what people were telling me, which is really cool and awesome. So yeah. Yeah,
when you go off to college, I think a lot of people who talk a lot about church talk about a very specific kind of church.
That exists.
That's the it totally
that does.
all over the place. It's like,
Yep. Yeah. And not to be like that.
It's sort of like an invasive species where it's really good at replicating, but it's not good for the environment.
No.
Yeah.
No. They are definitely the lionfish of Christianity.
I love that.
But yeah, so I'm really happy. This internship has given me just a lot of like hope, I think, which has been really cool. We've done a couple different podcasts now. I'm on Sam's Annex episodes where we talk about scripture and just yap about that and bring our own ideas to the table, our own experiences. And then I did a leadership podcast with an intern friend of mine, Elliot, and we talked about Gen Z's thoughts on leadership. And now we're doing the Holy Spirits episode.
I like it.
Yeah. So yeah, today we're going to talk a little bit about forgiveness, and specifically Matthew chapter 18, verses 21 to 22. And essentially, we get this setting where we have Jesus and Peter, and Peter's asking Jesus about forgiveness, and he's wondering how many times he should have to forgive someone, because that's a valid question. And Jesus gives him a really weird answer, which is so unexpected.
Yeah, very mathematical.
Oh, yeah. He says he should forgive people, like 77 times, which I think in the chapter, because we were reading a little bit of McGrath's book about it, and he was saying, I think it's like 490 times. It translates in biblical. I don't even know.
It's not sure if Jesus said 77 or 7 times 70.
Okay.
They're not sure which
So,
version,
okay.
but either way.
Either way, it's a lot of times.
Yeah.
And then he kind of goes into this story of like how, you should forgive for the wholeness of the world, and that should be, this balance that you're contributing to is one of the reasons why you should forgive. But I also wanted to sort of go into the definition of forgiveness.
Sure.
Because I think that even before we get to that, I would love to define it. So I guess, Matt, what is your definition of forgiveness in the first place?
I guess this is more theological than really like a true definition, but I think of forgiveness as letting go of the power that someone has been holding over you. So you allow yourself to release that control that person's had over your emotions, that situation, whatever it is, right? You're saying, okay, I'm going to let this go.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's a really bad definition. Like if I'm thinking about it, like thinking through the downstream effects of that definition, right? There's something more to forgiveness. Forgiveness is a hard thing to get.
Well, that's just one aspect of it, I feel like. But I like this idea of like forgiveness being something that sets you free. Whether that's like the weight of replaying a pain someone's inflicted on you over and over and over again, or if that's, extrapolating some sort of resentment in order for you to be able to live with this weight lifted off of you, which I think is really interesting.
Yeah. And I think in Jesus's parable that comes after that passage in Matthew, it seems like forgiveness is also for the other person in some way too, right? Something happens that makes the world a better place. And it's not in every situation. We can definitely put caveats around forgiveness. But in many situations, it does involve forgiving the other person, as well as not just doing the internal work, but actually engaging with the other person to tell them, I forgive you.
Right. Right. Because it's sort of like you're setting this example and giving them a chance to give it on to the next person.
It might be one of the most interesting forms of evangelism.
Yeah.
Right? Instead of, hey, believe in Jesus or go to hell.
Right. It's like you're setting an example.
Yeah.
I think that you're going to find I'm a little bit cynical, but at the end of the day, I do really enjoy the scriptures that we choose because I get to kind of break them down and I'm a little free to do so. I think that I don't fully enjoy that concept because sometimes I feel like what if they don't do that? Like, what if, like in the parable, he turns around and somebody else is asking him for forgiveness for something and he's like, actually, no, pay up right now. Yeah. I'm not forgiving your debt. Because sometimes we don't get a chance to send somebody to prison to be tortured until they pay their debt.
Sure.
And that's tough because you know what? Would love to do that.
Well, I don't think we get the opportunity to. And after I say this, I want to ask you what your definition of forgiveness is.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
I think sometimes we actually do get to torture people.
Ooh, fun.
But it's by actually not giving them the pleasure of being forgiven. We withhold forgiveness, and that's its own kind of torture that we can put on someone.
Right. Do you think that's going against what Jesus said, though?
Yeah, I do. I mean, yes.
Okay. Elaborate.
Vendela, what's your definition of it? And then we can, and then I'm happy to elaborate. I just don't want to dominate because I could.
No, it's okay.
I could go for a while, but I want to hear from you what your definition of forgiveness is.
So we were kind of talking about this a little before, but honestly was thinking I was defining it a little incorrectly because we were talking about the original reasons why we forgive. My definition after reading the scripture, after reading McGrath's amazing book, was that it's kind of like I said, you're extrapolating that like pain that's sort of like wedged its way into your sense of self, if that makes sense. Because a lot of times the decisions we make, I feel like, are sort of influenced by the pains of our past. And that's okay, as long as those pains aren't dominating those decisions. Sort of like how when you go to a therapist and you're like, I have trust issues, and they're like, okay, who hurt you then?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So I think that it's definitely, forgiveness to me is taking that pain and sort of like, not like getting rid of it because it's always going to be there, but recycling it, almost pulling it away from the main part of you at least, and maybe putting it towards something maybe like you're protecting yourself, but you're not like cutting yourself off to opportunities.
So that's like self-forgiveness, or forgiving yourself for something that happened to you.
To you.
Yeah. What about that forgiveness though that's external?
Like forgiving somebody else?
What do you think's going on there?
Well, I think that when somebody hurts you and that pain is sort of like just left festering and that resentment builds, that's a similar situation where it's like you really have to be like, okay, I'm resenting this person. It's now really taking up a lot of space in my mind. Like it's now hurting me even more, almost because I'm allowing it to. Now, I will say that all of these situations are case by case, because there are some things that I'm like, wow, I cannot believe you forgave that person for that. I don't think I would do that.
Sure.
For example, like generational trauma or like things like that.
Yeah, and in fact, let's get some stuff out of the way up front.
Yeah,
like sometimes
let's
forgiveness comes with a restraining order.
Right.
Sometimes forgiveness means we don't speak anymore.
We don't speak anymore. Because at the end of the day, forgiveness is your own peace of mind that you can live a happier, more fulfilling life. And if that's what that means, then that's what that means.
Yeah. Sometimes forgiveness means someone does serve a sentence or something like that. And you can still actually talk to the person and forgive them. But that doesn't mean that you then have to be back in relationship with them.
Have the same, That's what I was going to touch on too, because I feel like, we'll go into it later.
Forgiveness doesn't equal reconciliation.
No, it doesn't. And it's not that forgive and forget mentality. I think that when people say that, I almost am like, don't say that.
Yeah.
Because to me, I'm like, forgive and forget. There's many a thing I will never be forgetting.
Right.
I wish I could forget things, to be honest. I forget things that are silly, like names of restaurants. But if you wrong me, I won't forget about it. That's just how it is. And I wish it could be different, but it's not. And so I think that forgiveness is just not that. It's more of, like I said, you're sort of like removing that from your sense of self in order to be able to function more freely, to have that weight lifted. Very similar to what you were saying. But I think it's that step further, because I've been in many a time in my life where I've let a pain become my sense of self. And that's been really hard. So, and it's taken a long time, like as in like sometimes years, to pull myself out of a rut like that, where it's like, okay, I need to either forgive this person or honestly forgive this person. Because there's really no other way to do it. So that would be, I think, my idea of like what it is, the definition of it. But then we were kind of talking about the reasons why I actually forgive people sometimes, or why we do, which I was like, I was writing down, I said there's 3 reasons why I forgive people. Knee jerk, like as in I'm not thinking about the bigger picture of like my fulfillment or passing on a good deed to the world. It's more of like, I'll forgive you because I'll seem like a better person. So I'm really awesome.
Right.
Which I am. But like, that's not why. I'm awesome for so many other ways. For example, I'm funny as fuck. You can cuss on this podcast also, just so you know. Yeah, you can. If you want to.
Yeah.
Don't know if that's like, you don't really do that.
Hold it in.
Okay, sorry.
We'll see what
sorry.
happens.
Okay,
I'm not offended by other people cursing or anything like that.
I should have
I might let one go. But
okay, cool. If it feels right. Right. This is a safe space.
All right.
The
I'm
second
sorry, but you said you were funny as
fuck.
Oh, okay. Gotcha.
Yeah, I am. And I am.
Okay.
And I am really funny. I'm a big yapper.
Yeah.
The second reason I said was to salvage a relationship with someone to decrease the awkwardness. Like, if
Totally.
things are going to be awkward, I'm like, okay, yeah, I forgive you. Just think that I forgive you, because if not, things are going to be weird.
Right.
And that one is, I'm a people pleaser. So that's a fun one. Love to battle that on a daily basis. Number 3 is so other people see how great I am and believe what I believe, because I'm always right.
That good, like Matthew 6, and when you pray, be like the Pharisees who pray loudly in the street corners so that other people can see them praying.
Right, exactly. It's sort of like a performative activism forgiveness situation.
Yes.
And I'm making the world a better place. Therefore, back to the I am awesome point. So it's sort of like all comes together there.
And the thing is, forgiveness is about us.
Right.
But not quite in that way.
No, it's sort of that redirecting. But just wanted to get that out of the way, because I know that there's many a person listening to this thinking that one of those 3 reasons is the reason why they forgive people. And yeah, I'm not going to lie, I'm still going to do that sometimes.
I mean, do you do that knee jerk, like, I'm sorry?
When I think I've offended somebody, yes.
Yeah.
But one thing about me is I think I offend people all the time. I am constantly feeling like I'm stepping on eggshells. Even though, like, I feel like I speak like I don't, like I'm like, whatever. But if you were to be like, actually, I'm really offended by that, like, can you not? I'd be like, oh my God, kill me.
Yeah. Like, someone could totally prank you by being like, oh, that thing you just said, I'm super offended.
And I have been.
Yeah.
And I still think about that. Yes. So, but I think that's just a me thing. I mean, not to make that about me, but like, I think.
And probably our upbringing a little bit, in terms of, we were probably brought up with a certain sense of decorum.
Right.
Of, okay, these are the ways we're supposed to carry ourselves, the language we're supposed to use.
Are you an eldest child?
That's a tough one. I'm a middle child.
Okay. Yeah. Oh no.
But I sort
of. At least you're not an only child.
But sometimes I had to be the eldest. So
okay.
It's just kind of, yeah.
So you're giving eldest child energy. All my friends are eldest children. So
yeah.
And so am I. If you can't tell.
I didn't have I didn't have a big brother to really like kind of
to bully you a little bit.
Oh, I had a big brother to bully me.
Oh, okay.
I just not have a big brother to be
awesome like me.
Yeah.
My younger siblings, I was gonna say if you're listening, they're not listening, but they love me so much for the time that we spent together, and that is sarcasm. But we're good friends now. But then we were not. But yeah, so I think that those reasons are obviously not the reasons why we should be forgiving people, but definitely are similar in that they are self-serving. And I feel like self-serving doesn't always have to be bad, because I think self-care is self-serving. I think going to therapy is self-serving. I think putting time and intention into your hobbies is self-serving, things that increase or boost your mental health. And I think that forgiveness is also one of those things that are self-serving in a good way, which I really enjoyed. But we were talking about something before I went off on this tangent.
So, I mean, I could go anywhere at this point, but where, what were there other things that McGray talked about in his book, maybe that could kind of take us down some different paths? And unpacking this idea of forgiveness, right?
Right.
Because it's a big, gnarly idea.
It is. So there was one thing that I saw that was interesting, that he was talking about sort of like a cycle. So it says, in one part it says, forgiveness involves the conscious choice to end the cycle of bitterness, revenge, and grudge holding that's destroying your relationship with another person. And I do like that idea of a cycle and sort of stopping that.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know. What do you think about that?
I think the cycle of violence or harm that leads to sort of bitterness and resentment, that leads to more violence and harm,
right,
happens in all of our lives. It happens in many marriages. It happens in many child-parent relationships, right? That relationships break down over time when these cycles aren't interrupted by someone asking for forgiveness or offering forgiveness or offering a hug, right?
Right.
There's a really cool biblical story that kind of is jumping out at me right now. and I can't take credit for it. I got the idea from Rob Bell.
Okay.
He had this sermon called Drop the Jawbone. And I was like, what are we talking about here? And in Judges 16, there's this guy named Samson. It might be earlier in Judges, but Samson, I'm like, big guy, cut his hair. He can't be as strong, that kind of thing. Well, earlier in his story, he gets really mad at some Philistines because they tricked him into marrying somebody and then ran off with his wife. He goes, I'm going to get him back. I'm going to go tie a bunch of foxes together, light their tails on fire, and run them through the Philistines' crops.
Fun.
So burn all their crops.
Prank.
The Philistine goes, cool, we're now going to kill your wife. And Samson goes, oh, you guys are jerks. Here, I'm going to grab a jawbone and I'm going to kill 1,000 of you.
Oh.
Yeah. And then it continues. Like Samson's cycle just continues, where eventually he dies by basically pulling a temple down on himself and killing like 10,000 Philistines.
Oh.
So this cycle of violence and retribution,
right?
We see it in the Bible, in the story of Samson. We see it in other stories in the Bible. But I think when you think about those stories too of, okay, you took something that's mine. Well, I'm going to cause you economic harm. Oh, now you killed somebody of mine. Well, I'm going to go kill more of your people. Mm-hmm. We don't have to look too far back in history to find examples of that, right?
No.
We don't get forgiveness. Like forgiveness is a very churchy term.
Yeah.
But it's not really used in the marketplace or outside of church.
Well,
or is it?
Do you use? Is it synonymous with something?
No, I think it should be used. I don't think the church should have a the corner.
A monopoly.
I don't think the church should corner the market on forgiveness, right?
No.
What if just someone in our country in leadership would consider practicing some forgiveness? What if that was modeled a little bit more?
I think that in order for that to happen, you have to be ready to look at yourself in turn. I feel like looking at yourself is sort of necessary before you can forgive other people for things, if that makes sense. Because you really have to be centered in who you are and your sense of self to notice that something else is externally controlling your actions. For example, Samson probably just kept thinking that it was all their fault, which it is. Not cool to kill a wife.
Well, but he started it.
Did he?
Yeah, so that's the crazy thing in the story. But even the phrase.
See, I don't know this.
But even the phrase, he started it. Even the phrase, right?
He started, right? Exactly.
Like, come on. Now we're really meddling.
Right. It's like when you're watching The Bachelor and two girls are crying, you can't even remember which one started.
Right. Or any argument you've had with a partner.
Right.
Who started it?
You don't know.
Right.
Could have been a long time ago.
Yeah. So then at some point, someone has to be the bigger person.
Right.
Or not even the bigger person. Someone just has to remember where the emergency kit is stored, and that emergency kit is forgiveness. Right.
And also we were talking about that balance, and once the scale is tipped so far that you're like, okay, I'm no longer gaining anything out of this. Literally I am losing everything. It's like gambling low key. I'm not gonna lie, because I feel like he's putting in more and more, and he's thinking that he's gonna get something out of it, and then he just is losing over and over again.
Yeah.
It's like you have you think that you have control and that you think there's going to be that satisfaction after, and it's just never going to come. Mm-hmm. But it's almost addictive.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah. It's like, what is it? Like the endorphins that go off when you feel satisfaction, or when you feel like you're winning.
Have you ever been in a cycle like that?
Do I say that like I've experienced?
No. I think there's been real moments in my life where I can picture somebody where I'm like, I hate you.
For sure.
I'm going to, and we still have to interact all the time. This wasn't a partner or anything like this. This was a coworker, right?
Yeah.
At a prior job, but I was like, I hate you. Like when your number pops up on my phone, the phone test.
No, I get mad.
Right? Yeah.
Or I just rename you as something else. That's probably not nice.
Okay.
So,
I've never
just
considered
kidding.
doing that. No, that's brilliant. I've never considered doing that. I've seen the one that's you change it to do not answer.
Oh, for sure.
Whether sober or drunk, do not answer.
Do not answer. I feel like definitely a sibling situation.
Yeah. Okay.
And my sister and I, we get along so well now, but it's because we've acknowledged that we're so different. Mm-hmm. When you're kids, you can't really do that. You kind of just expect somebody to just understand you all the time, because you're not really thinking of what other people's experiences are as a kid. That whole empathy hasn't quite clicked in yet. Mm-hmm. And so I think we would butt heads a lot as kids. And it would definitely be that one-up situation. Oh, you got the shower first? cool, I'm
Yeah.
eating all the dessert downstairs
Yeah.
while you're in the shower
Yeah.
then.
There
And
you
you
go.
come out and you're upset. Oh, now you're gonna, I don't know, put freaking silly putty in my pillow.
That's some real Samson level stuff right
Yeah,
there.
I know. It
Oh,
gets
sorry.
really
Hold on. Let me try that
nasty.
one again. That's some real Samson level shit right there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. That's
Felt
what I'm
good.
saying.
Felt so
Felt
good.
good, right? But yeah, so I think that I've definitely been in a cycle like that. I think, you know, we were talking about how like overwhelmed we are all the time.
Yeah.
I think I don't have time to be in a cycle like that right now.
Okay.
I think I could possibly, but
But then do you find when
Yeah.
you're overwhelmed that actually more microaggressions isn't quite the right word, but sort of when you're
Micro
overwhelmed, you
problems,
sort
yeah.
of you give people less grace. And
Yeah.
grace and forgiveness are kind of close in the constellation with each other, right?
No,
Like you
definitely.
give people less grace. And sometimes I feel like when I'm really overwhelmed is when I really stub my toe and like,
I hate
oh,
stubbing my toe.
I hurt somebody's feelings. And
Yeah.
now I need to go ask for forgiveness.
Right.
Right.
And then
I said the thing
Yeah.
because I was tired, because I was stressed out.
Right. No, yeah, I think I definitely do that. I think when I'm stressed, I tend to like kind of retract because I don't want to do that, which is not always great because then I end up not sharing what's actually wrong.
Yeah.
And then when people do decide to press and actually figure out what the heck is happening, I do tend to snap.
Yeah.
So, I think in situations like that, because honestly, that's happened recently with my partner. Love her to death, but like I've been under so much stress recently, so has she. And usually I'll be very quick to be like, I'm sorry about that.
Yeah.
That was not okay. But I think that there's also like that second step of like, okay, how am I gonna like not really let that happen again? Because
Sure.
I can't just keep doing that.
No, of course not. Yeah.
So I
Because
think
even though you're supposed to forgive 77
Right.
times.
77. I mean, that's not a lot.
That's
I'm
not a
definitely
lot.
running up my tab right now.
Yeah.
Bree's like, what the fuck, bro? You
Yeah.
literally have snapped at me 77 times.
Right.
So
So, I mean, you're right. Like at some point, you have to address the underlying issue
Right.
internally or relationally with the person so
Yeah.
that it doesn't keep happening.
yeah.
But sometimes when those things do happen, if we're tuned into how we're doing mentally, emotionally, that kind of stuff, we can kind of go, oh, that was the alarm going off. That was
Right.
the canary in the coal mine to tell me, oh, I snapped. Okay. Something
Right.
else is out of balance here.
No, yeah. And that's also why when you said I'm a little overwhelmed, I was like, oh, is anything gonna change soon? Because I think that, and this is sort of like a dual thing, but like I tend to be like, okay, it's okay that I'm like really overwhelmed and like low-key like snapping at people a little bit right now because I know that like something's gonna change like
Sure.
soon.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay. But then it's like, yeah, but like I heard this like I listened to this podcast called Binge-topia that I love so much.
Okay.
Binch-topia. And they were saying that it's really interesting because they listened to this or they heard this like phrase that was like, how you live a day is like how you live your life. And I was like, I live my life very hectically.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I was thinking about that and I was like, I feel like there would be less need for, maybe I would be less uncomfortable with forgiveness if I wasn't in a place of being so stressed all the time and having to like say I'm sorry about that thing or like I don't know, because I think the less like proud I am about something or like it's almost like the stuff that's it's easier to say I'm sorry for is almost more humiliating because I'm like I definitely could have not done that.
Yeah.
Like I could have just monitored my emotions instead of actually doing that. I feel like sometimes the things that are larger and like more complex, it's a different kind of difficulty. It's sort of like, okay, why did I do that? Or like, why did they do that to me?
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So
what was right? Like asking yourself, like, what was that big hurt within me that kind of flared up in that moment?
Right. And that's why I love my therapist, Esther, because she tells me that.
Nice.
She's the best.
Yeah.
But yeah, I also, did you want to talk any more about that?
I just wanted to ask you something real quick.
Okay,
when
go
we
ahead.
were talking about bigger forgiveness, not the day-to-day stuff, but kind of those big thorny ones that kind of stick with us. Did you have something in your mind's eye? You don't have to share it, but I think I'm just curious if you do.
Yeah. Yes, I do.
Cool.
And that leads me into the next thing I was going to say too, because one of the questions that I'm not going to take credit for it, McGray's reflection questions, which are obviously sick as fuck. Like, I love the way he writes and his perspective. But one of them was, it was basically like, what makes forgiveness hard or what makes it difficult?
Yeah.
And obviously those larger, more complex things of like, not just like an issue with my sense of self or like something that I'm struggling with internally, but also like my biggest thing is if somebody does something to me that really invalidates like my experiences or like existence, that is really difficult for me to forgive because I think, like we were talking about before, I'm a very empathetic person. That's not a flex. It's actually really sucky sometimes to be that way. And I think that it comes a lot from a slew of different experiences I've had. For example, I've studied gender and sexuality studies in college, which when you learn about systems of oppression that are really difficult to extrapolate and very heavy, you're constantly trying to not cross any boundaries because you know they're there. It's easier to cross those lines when you don't understand the context of them. The other thing is I grew up in a really loving family, thankfully. I'm very privileged to say that. And I also grew up in a very monetarily, financially stable household. So, and I have a lot of friends and family that didn't. And so I think that constantly feeling like I'm stepping on, people's toes is something that for me, I'm like, it's good. It keeps me in check a little bit. Like I definitely am privileged in a lot of ways. So I think that it's hard because when people hurt me in a way that I feel like I would never, ever hurt somebody else. And if I did, I would immediately be like, please tell me how I cannot do that again.
Yeah.
How can I not do that? Like, what did I say? How did I say it? What was wrong with it? Why did it hurt you? Why did it make you feel invalidated? Because to me, it's like the worst thing that happened there was I feel uncomfortable for me. The worst thing that happened to them is their existence is called into question.
Sure. And I think it's really hard to forgive people who do that, right?
Yeah.
Especially when you're the victim of it.
Right.
Yeah.
And there are definitely specific instances of that happening that I can think of, like off the top of my head, that it's just like, I think really hard. And I think that's another reason why I really don't like, I previously, before I sort of dove into this text and also like unpacked how I define forgiveness, when I originally was thinking of it as a forgive and forget kind of mentality, I was really hesitant to want to even talk about it, which is why I did it, because I like to be uncomfortable sometimes, but is because it just makes me so mad. Like, I'm like, why can you not understand that when you hurt someone, you should feel bad?
Yeah. So how
yeah.
do you think you help somebody see that?
How do I think I do that, or just in general?
And we can talk generally. We don't have to talk personally. Yeah.
I feel like for me, I have to really check my anger.
Okay.
Because a lot of times, especially as a woman, anger is seen as just jumping to conclusions, being emotional, and in general, not just as a woman. And so,
although women are not allowed to wield anger like men are.
Right, exactly. It's seen as really unprofessional. If I cussed on the phone the same way as many people in my place of corporate work cuss on the phone, men in my place of work cuss on the phone, it would be like, whoa, you need to calm down. So I think that that's sort of a dual perspective that I have to take into account. But I think that not getting angry, everybody's learning. Not everybody took gender and sexuality courses in college, and not everybody is so exhaustingly thinking of others all the time, to a point where sometimes it does dip into people pleasing. And so I have to remember that because people have lives, like they're living lives, they're surviving, like they don't have time to think about, not saying a slur sometimes. So I have to, of course, there's a boundary, there's a line, like, take that into account. And then it's also like, if I've told you 77 times,
Sure.
you know?
Yeah.
So I think that not letting my emotions initially get too arose, I guess you could say, when I get hurt by things like that. But then also, I think education is really important because, like I said, when you know the reasons why you can offend people and the context of why you can offend people, it's way easier to A, not do it, but be quicker to say I'm sorry, because I understand. I know. I may not understand, but I empathize because I know about that thing that is upsetting you.
Yeah.
So,
and it's tough because I mean, I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on this, but like when someone chooses to use a slur or does something like that, like especially when it's a conscious choice, that is sort of an act of violence.
Yes.
And it is nowadays. It's so nowadays. What am I? I sound old.
Nowadays,
but like
back in my day.
No, but I feel like culturally, especially with the way that men are sort of being taught to behave around toxic masculinity and that kind of stuff, almost deploying slurs is seen as a badge of honor. Right?
Yeah.
And what is our response or your response or someone's response when that is used as violence towards them? And the word, the biblical passage that comes to mind to me is Jesus saying, turn the other cheek. Right. Do you, and that doesn't mean don't stand up for yourself.
Right.
But what does it look like then when someone's being that rude or that mean, you know?
And there's really no forgiveness in sight there for me sometimes in those situations.
Yeah, and I think that's good to know that like those are the red lines for us right now.
Right. And it's okay to draw line because we were saying before that sometimes that sense of peace and, you know, like fulfillment is maybe not talking to that person or having a different relationship with that person.
Yeah, or just saying to that person, like I thought, like, okay, I feel like speed dating kind of changed the world, or online dating kind of changed the world in a lot of different ways, because I think we got all of a sudden this immediate just access to meet a ton of people all at once. We're having all these experiences of, oh, wow, that's the context you're from. On paper, you looked really interesting. And then you said this one thing when we were at the bar, and I'm like, oh, you're that?
Yeah.
Never mind.
And it comes with a whole identity, I feel like.
And we created this whole idea
on
of
both
like
sides.
red flags, green flags, beige flags, right? This whole system, right?
Exactly.
And you know, this was a long time ago that I was doing online dating, but I remember the novelty of it, but the craziness of you're meeting so many people so quickly that we got into this idea, I think as a culture, that it's like, oh, there are these deal breakers for me. Of like, okay, you said the word. You said a word that I don't use, and it made me really uncomfortable. And you know what? We don't even have enough of a relationship where I need to worry about forgiving you. I'm just going to be like, you know what?
Actually,
great time. Let's, you know,
thanks for paying for the drinks.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
That situation was an example of something that would have been benefited by curiosity. And I'm going to throw out 3 words here that I think can weave some stuff together, but curiosity, empathy, and humility. And McGray talks about those words actually frequently in his prayers and that kind of stuff. But like sometimes the root of what helps us reach forgiveness or reach reconciliation is those 3 things, right? Because when someone doesn't want to get a drink with you at the bar, and then if you respond with, well, I'm hurt now, they hurt me, like that's one way to kind of stop the conversation there. And not that I think if a girl says, hey, I don't want to talk to you, that's the end of the conversation. right.
No means no.
But like, and for him, the inward journey then of, okay, the curiosity of, I wonder what was going on there. And you don't need to ever know, you know, but it doesn't become I'm never going to meet a partner, you know, women are bad.
I hate all women.
Yeah.
Or like, why is it hurting me that she said no? Why does it matter that this one girl that I randomly walked up to said no to me? Like, why is that hurting me so much? Why does my ego feel so hurt? Like, is it because I'm getting validation from people are telling me that that's the only way I can get validation is if I get girls at a bar?
Yeah, sure.
You know? So I think that's interesting too. The last one's about self-forgiveness. It says, think about how you need to forgive yourself what is required for you to experience the grace and mercy of God and move past the guilt and shame. And I like this end part, claim the life of peace that God wants for you.
Okay.
So why don't you think on that?
Okay.
Can you give an answer now? I feel like you could totally do that.
Oh, I mean, I just think, I think any of the inward journey that we do requires a couple of things. It requires help. It requires a therapist or a mental health counselor. It doesn't have to be a Christian counselor, but someone who can help hold the mirror up and kind of do what I call the Jedi mind tricks of kind of helping you see, oh, that's the pattern, right? That's playing out. Or just to ask, my therapist does this really fun thing where she'll just ask this follow-up questions, just like, yeah, so what are you thinking right now? And I'm just like, oh, okay, fine.
All right, now I have to like consciously.
Yeah, like say, but to get to the negative self-talk, for me anyways, it's like, what are those tapes that play in your head that tell you everything that you're not, or what you're doing wrong in any given situation, right? So we came in here today and I said, hey, I'm overwhelmed because I overstretched myself, and I do that all the time.
Right.
And I'll be honest, this whole week I've known that was happening. And the conversation in my head has been one of, well, you're doing it again. Yeah. You're doing that same shit again. Why do you keep doing that to yourself? Right. And the work is hearing that and then going, okay, you did that. That doesn't have to be who you are. You took on too much this week. It's okay. What are you going to do next week to help you think about how you can take on less? And it may mean that you have to disappoint someone. This is me still talking to myself. And disappointing someone's really hard for you. But you've done it and you didn't die.
Oh, yeah. Barely.
Barely, sure. But also, you're probably going to have to disappoint someone.
Right.
Right? And it's just that, it's that inner monologue, because where anxiety comes from is the record skipping. You're hearing the same 5 to 7 words over and over and over and over and over again. And you panic because you can't escape it. Your brain is literally just repeating or replaying the same thing.
Right.
So when you were able to use the positive self-talk, that's kind of like picking the needle up off the record and setting it off to the side for a little bit.
Yeah.
So I would say that's, to answer McGray's question, I say that's a step towards self-forgiveness, is forgiving ourselves for the tapes that play in our head. Now, I think for some of us, especially some of us listening to this podcast right now, there may be concrete examples of times when we have actually really harmed somebody else, right? Through any number of things. And being able to forgive yourself in that moment to say, okay, that happened. I did that.
Right.
That is not who I am anymore.
And that's really hard.
Yeah. And believing that, right?
Yeah.
Believing that when a date pops up, like a date on the calendar pops up, right? Like, oh, that was, yep. Okay. All right. But I'm not that person. Okay.
Right.
Believing that when you remember what you did, right?
Right.
And it's just like, okay, but I'm not that person, and that's the work of self-forgiveness. And then that also comes with the work of really making sure that you have like stopped that behavior too, right? It doesn't help if you just forgive yourself, but you keep doing it. Now, addictions are a completely different thing.
Right.
I'm giving so many caveats here because
I know we have to though, because both of us are people pleasers.
Well, and I think it's also the real lived experience, right?
Yeah.
Of, okay, we've all done some bad stuff.
Right.
But also I think for some of us, there's just things that we need a community for. We need the 12 steps, or we need something more for it, right? But I think for many of us, there are these things that like, they play in our head, but if we just if we can get better at telling ourselves more positive things about what's true about ourselves, then we can start forgiving ourselves.
That was really beautiful. I'm so glad I had you on for this.
Thanks.
Oh my gosh.
That was fun.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. We definitely talked for longer than I planned, so I'm sorry.
That's okay. No, it's okay.
Thank you guys so much for listening.
Yeah.
This was a long episode. But it's always long. All the ones that I've done are like incredibly long.
Oh, geez.
And my intern friends are like, can you stop doing that?
Stop.
Like,
Oh, please.
Yeah, so I'm just a yapper, and I like hearing what other people say. So.
There you go.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Vendela.
Thank you so much for coming on.
Of course.
And thank you, Studio Wesley, for having me on this podcast too. Pat on my own back.
Hey, there you go.
Bye.
Bye, guys.
Thanks for tuning in to Holy Spirits, a Studio Wesley Annex series. This podcast is produced by the team at Wesley's Revival, and in accordance with UMC Social Principles, all individuals consuming alcohol during our recordings are of U.S. legal age and drinking responsibly.